We continue now with our special report. As the country and the world today remember the 9/11 attacks and the almost 3,000 people who were killed that day, there is growing concern about a second set of victims, those first responders and others in the area who were exposed to the toxic clouds of dust when the two towers of the World Trade Center collapsed. It has become an extremely emotional issue with an outpouring of concern. Joining us to talk about it and the legal implications is a lawyer who represents many of the victims, David Eisbrouch of the law firm Eisbrouch Marsh. Mr. Eisbrouch, I should say, full disclosure, you are the father of one of our colleagues here at the Law and Crime Network, and welcome.
That would be true. Thank you very much, Brian. Please call me David.
Give me a sense of the scope of this issue and whether it is scientifically based.
Well, first of all, the Victims' Compensation Fund, which was created as a result of the Zadroga Act being signed into law by President Obama in 2011, created a fund where people, just not first responders, but individuals who lived, worked, or went to school below Canal Street during the 8 months following 9/11 are now able to receive compensation from a nearly $8 billion fund created by the government, which means, in broad respect, is that if you've been diagnosed with any cancer and you meet the presence requirement of being below Canal Street, any cancer, you receive compensation. You're entitled to receive compensation from the fund, also respiratory illnesses.
Any cancer or respiratory illness without proof necessarily that it's caused by the toxic dust.
Well, the proof element, Brian, is very interesting. The reason that the fund was created was to eliminate the proof aspect of a litigation. This is not a litigation. You're not suing an entity or the government or the city or a country to receive this compensation. This is a fund that was created specifically to compensate people if they meet the two-prong requirement. The two prongs being the illness, the disease, and the presence requirement of living, working, or going to school below Canal Street. So they're fairly liberal in their interpretation of being down there, but you do have to, and we do have to file proofs to substantiate and to prove that people were down there at the time.
And what sort of illnesses are you seeing as a result of this toxic dust?
There have been 10,000 cancers diagnosed since 9/11. There are a myriad of respiratory illnesses, a myriad of cancers that have been diagnosed. In the last year, from June 17 to June 18, there have been 8,400 people registered with the World Trade Center Health Organization, which is another prong of the process. People first have to register with the World Trade Center Health Organization program to become certified, and then they become eligible in the Victims' Compensation Fund. So to answer your question, a myriad of cancers, a myriad of respiratory illnesses.
We saw reports last week of a number of men diagnosed with breast cancer. Highly unusual.
Highly unusual, but I believe the report indicated there were 15 men diagnosed with breast cancer. There are people from all walks of life. There was another article recently about FBI agents. At the time, one FBI agent was killed during the 9/11 attack. Subsequently, I believe 15 FBI agents have been diagnosed with cancers or respiratory and have qualified for the fund.
Who's pushing back against this? Anybody?
Great question. The fund is presently due to expire in December 2020. President Obama in 2015 extended the fund through 2020. The monitoring aspect through the World Trade Center Health Program was extended to 2090, but you can only file a claim for compensation till December 2020. So to answer your question, who's pressing back against this? For the first 10 years when this act was trying to get passed, there was resistance because of the funding aspect. Some factions of the Republican Party then resisted the passage of the act. They were trying to position it as offsets against the Bush tax cuts at that time. They wanted the tax cuts extended. They were basically playing their political game. What happens now with the Trump tax cuts in 2020, where does the money come from? To date, approximately only half of the fund has been utilized. Half of the $8 billion has been paid out to approximately 20,000 claimants. So doing the math, the fund has only been in existence for roughly 7 years. They've gone through about half of the funds to date. If it extended another 7 years, then the question would be what happens after that. But first, you'd have to get Congress to extend the 2020 deadline, at least till a time period when all these funds are utilized.
So that's the issue now, whether there's a cutoff in 2020, and there's quite a campaign underway because of that. And comedian Jon Stewart has been helping to lead the campaign, and he recently appeared on the NBC Today program with 2 first responders to try to make sure that the first responders and others got their full legal rights. Here's what happened to that clip.
I've known Rich and John for many, many years. John through the Feel Good Foundation and Rich through the fire department. And these guys were instrumental in lobbying to get the Zadroga Act passed, which brought health care to the first responders and survivors and victims. And unfortunately, we just passed a horrible milestone, which is over 10,000 cancer cases, 9/11 related.
So it's been 19 years. Isn't that enough time to determine who does and doesn't have an issue because of the toxic dust?
Absolutely not. Dr. Crane, who is the medical director of the World Trade Center Health Program, recently was quoted, and accurately, that cancers that manifest because of toxic exposure sometimes will take decades to actually come to fruition, similar to asbestos claims with mesothelioma. These funds are being set up for individuals who worked around asbestos sites from the 1960s, 70s, 80s, 20, 30, 40 years after the exposure. Similarly, in 9/11 claims, the same thing will happen. People will be diagnosed with cancers and respiratory illnesses 20, 30, 40 years. We're only 17 years out right now.
That far out?
Yeah, that far out.
And what kind of money would that require if you're going to give compensation to all those victims?
Well, if we just do the simple math of $8 billion being allocated, let's say for the first 10 to 12 to 15 years, there would have to be significant dollars allocated for the next 20 to 30 years.
And if the eligibility period is not extended past 2020, what happens to those people who then develop respiratory diseases or cancer?
Brian, great question, because right now the medical monitoring is extended till 2090, but the fund is only extended to 2020. What happens to those people? This fund was implemented and created for the specific purpose of eliminating litigation and lawsuits against the entities I mentioned before. This fund was created to eliminate the proving liability. This fund was created so people would receive compensation relatively easily. And might I mention also that the cancers do start at $250,000 plus economic losses. So if the fund was not there anymore and people were diagnosed and you almost have a quasi-proof that it's related to 9/11 toxins, then do these lawsuits start up again? We hope not. We hope the government, we hope Congress, we hope the president, either this president or the next president, will do the right thing and extend it. And this, most likely, in my opinion, will be a major issue during the upcoming campaigns.
And what have you heard from the Trump administration about this issue?
Well, he hasn't called me recently, and no surprise there. But it's interesting you asked that Mr. Trump, in my opinion, again, has stated he has tremendous vision. He's always stated that he saw people across the Hudson River in New Jersey applauding at the 9/11 attacks. That's his vision. I hope he has the same vision to look forward to compensate the people who were hurt and killed because of those attacks.
Has the White House taken a position on the extension?
Not that I've heard of.
You think they should?
Absolutely. And the time is now. You don't want to wait until 2020. You basically want to get the ball rolling. I would think after the midterm elections coming up, you have a new Congress coming in 2018, 2019. That'll give it, a year and a half. You need the foot soldiers running, before the 2020 elections.
David Eisbrouch, thank you very much for being here today. Keep us posted on your work as the cases continue to.
Brian, thanks
when
for
we
having me.
return, what the men charged as the masterminds of the attacks. Why has there been no trial 17 years later? Justice denied.
A senator attacked a Supreme Court nominee and called him a racist for alleged comments after 9/11. Stop. Stop. Please, stop using the bones and ashes of our loved ones as props in your political theater. Their lives, sacrifices, and death are worth so much more. Let's not trivialize them or us. It hurts. To my mom and to all of you and your loved ones, never forget.